Have you ever wondered how, in these days of modern technology, firefighters maximize real-time geographic info to save homes, pinpoint evacuations, and save lives? Well, they don't. At least they didn't. Not until our speaker came along. Dynamic, up-to-the-minute communication among firefighters about the precise size, shape, and place of fires has been woefully absent. To tackle this, our speaker merged her knowledge of data science and physics with her experience as the daughter of a firefighter and a paramedic. Her invention empowers citizens and public safety agencies with the tools and information necessary to prepare for, respond to, and recover from the disasters of our times. She's here to explain data-driven response. She has 4 brothers. She loves her bears. I'm just reading it. Perhaps she'll tell us about that.
UC Berkeley.
Apparently she makes the best caramel sauce in the whole wide world. She said, oh no, it's the best caramel sauce portrait artist west of the Pecos River. Haley, blame that on Buddy. I just read it. So let's have a blazing welcome. For Bailey Farren. Thank you. Take it away.
Thank you very much, Buddy. That was a beautiful introduction. The caramel sauce portrait, I'm not going to explain that. Bears, I think, is a UC Berkeley reference. Go Bears. It's obligatory. We have to do it. But it's really good to be here. I'm very grateful to be on at this time. It's interesting right now. I'm here to talk a little bit about Perimeter, but at this moment I'm actually at a first responder conference in Healdsburg, California, for physical, mental, emotional resiliency. And I come to these conferences as a speaker every year. I teach a little bit about cognitive behavioral therapy. I studied cognitive science at Berkeley, and I've been here for a few days. And a lot of the firefighters that I'm working with here were on the campfire. They were at Tubbs, and they've been on some of the recent fires that have affected that area, like the August Complex fire. And, hearing some of their stories have been, they're still wild to me now. They were wild to me when I first heard them. And it's definitely an important reminder of what we're doing at Perimeter and why. Now, when I started Perimeter, it was really never supposed to be a company. I started Perimeter when I was studying computer science, taking my first computer science class, actually, at UC Berkeley. And during that semester, the Tubbs fire happened. And before the campfire, the Tubbs fire was the most devastating fire in California history. And with my family being from Santa Rosa, we had to evacuate, and we had to do so with literally no information about where to go or how to get there. Earlier, a couple of you were talking about some of the issues around escape routes. They are not only a huge issue because there are, very few of them, but oftentimes those routes can be compromised by something like a spot fire. And so what happened during my evacuation is, my family was fortunate enough to choose a route and to make it to safety. But after the incident, it led me to ask a lot of questions. And at first I thought that first responders must have everything they needed to make decisions. They just didn't have an interface to get that information to citizens like me. But that assumption turned out to be completely incorrect. Spoiler alert. It turns out that they're using paper maps and radios. All the first responders and firefighters that are working to contain all the fires that you've seen on the news recently, or maybe been exposed to yourself, they're primarily relying on paper that they get handed every 24 hours at a 7 a.m. briefing. They get a new paper map, and everything else is communicated in the interim over radio. That means they have right now they don't have any way of tracking their personnel. They do not know in real time where the fire is. They are not seeing real time wind direction or vegetation on the ground. And having incident information in real time dynamically is incredibly difficult for first responders, and it's completely impossible for citizens. And so after spending about a year while I was still at Berkeley, working on this as a research project, working with the Berkeley Fire Research Group, working with NASA Ames and their Remote Sensing Advisory Committee to work on using infrared to actually locate some of this this fire sensing onto a map. What we learned is that this couldn't just be a research project, and it couldn't just be something that I was doing with Berkeley and my dad's department. His fire department is in Petaluma, California, and he actually just retired this summer. But we realized it couldn't just be a research project when the campfire burned, and so many people lost their lives in large part because they didn't know where the roads were closed and where the spot fires were. Neither first responders nor citizens. It had a huge impact on their community, and that's really when my team was formed and founded at Berkeley, and we realized that this is something that we had to work on immediately. And it seems to us that the data really pointed to these fires getting much, much, much worse over the next few years. And so we have been working and really sprinting since then to build our technology, it's a mapping platform for information, for emergency information specifically. And we worked so hard to get it up and running and beta test it during the Kincaid fire, once again in my hometown, my home county. And we tested it last year with a few agencies like CAL FIRE. And then this year, we brought on our first paying customer to beta test our technology, give us constant feedback. And since the pandemic started, we have spent pretty much the entire time working over Zoom every single week with the Forest Service and CAL FIRE and a number of other agencies, including our partner agency, Palo Alto Office of Emergency Services, to work on the solution and make sure that by 2021, we can release something that is truly valuable and life-changing for both the first responders that we're working with and for, and the citizens that we are hoping to get real-time emergency information to. So I am more than happy to go any which way with Perimeter. There's a lot to say, but if anyone has any specific questions or areas of interest, I'd love to dive into that.
Thanks, Bailey. So if you've got a question, please raise your hand or unmute yourself. Chris, looks like you've unmuted yourself.
Yeah, I have. Thank you very much for that. This is very exciting. I guess I'm a little astounded that we haven't done this before. And I know the agencies you mentioned are California-based predominantly. Are you dealing with any broader agency base with other resources outside the state as well?
Yeah, good question. So first of all, the Forest Service is national. They do have a lot of land in California that they are responsible, but they are, they work across all different types of disasters across the country. And something that we have learned is incredibly important for kind of California mutual aid is if we can get this platform into the hands of neighboring agencies and states, and eventually into the hands of any agencies that have large-scale incidents that they need to contain, whether that be a hurricane or a tornado. We've seen record-breaking seasons of both those things in the past 2 years just in the United States. And so if we can get this into their hands for real-time response, then I think we'll be able to create a much more effective system for everyone who uses it, even in California, right? When everyone's using the same thing to share information, then information is, it doesn't exist in silos where Californians have it and our mutual aid partners in Oregon and Washington and Colorado don't necessarily. But what we've also learned is that I think Perimeter is going to be applicable for many types of disasters across the country. Even though we started with a focus on wildfires, we learned very quickly when we were beta testing that our platform is immediately applicable to all types of incidents, not only the largest incidents that we see, like a flood, like a hurricane, like a fire, but also day-to-day response. Today, even our Silicon Valley public safety agencies rely on binders full of hand-drawn paper maps to have all of their incident information. And even for just your day-to-day medical aid calls, first responders need to have, real-time geospatial map-based information.
I'd like to follow up with you sometime after this. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Skip?
Yeah, Bailey, I have a couple of questions for you, actually.
Yeah.
In terms of the firefighting, the platform that you use for the firefighting, what elements do you put into that platform? What are the variables that you consider?
Yeah, you mean data variables that we display?
Right.
Yeah, so there's a lot of information that exists that we can aggregate together that we don't have to, we don't have to create it ourselves. For example, wind speed, wind direction, vegetation, if it's timber, if it's brush, a lot of that information already exists. So do, of course, some of your basic kind of, map base layer maps. We don't have to do that, traffic, etc. We can just pull all of that onto our map. But then something that we allow our first responders to do themselves is our platform is very collaborative, kind of like Waze, if you've ever used that. We allow first responders to input incident information that perhaps only they have access to. So if you are, if you're a firefighter and you're managing a spot fire, or you've located a spot fire and it's compromised an evacuation route, instead of trying to radio that and have, maybe getting it to 5% of the crew on an incident, instead you can put it on a map and everyone has access to it. Additionally, during some of these larger incidents, they tend to have GIS teams, geospatial information systems teams, that work together to collect information to get onto the paper maps that they release on a regular basis. And so we'd also be, a platform for that GIS team to not only take some of the information that, they've already collected and not just display it on these paper maps, but be able to display it in an incredibly simple and intuitive way, which is, obviously different from, paper, but definitely different from some of the more complex GIS technologies that are currently being used.
So let me ask you a follow-up. Does that mean that if we talked about earlier the idea of exit routes being cut off by fire,
Yeah.
or timber fall, or whatever the case may be,
Yeah.
is the idea that individuals in these communities would have access to this information online on their iPhone or their iPad to get real-time information about what road may be blocked that they will not be able to escape? That
is correct. And on top of that, right now, if you've ever received an evacuation alert, this wildfire season, I had my 4th evacuation personally, so I feel like I've seen a lot of these at this point. I'm become an old pro. Whenever you get an evacuation notice, pretty much what it says is there's a wildfire detected in your area. The mandatory evacuation zone is north of this road, south of this road, west of this road, east of this road. It does not give you a map. It does not give you a link to click to get more information. And we see those evacuation notices as a really essential place for us to be embedding links to our map, because what happens is all of us get that notice, and even if we're from the county, we don't necessarily know where Adobe Road and Fuller Road are, and if we're north or south of them. Especially when I got my evacuation notice, I was in a place called Guerneville, which is about 45 minutes west of Santa Rosa. And so I wasn't in a place that I was super familiar with. And I am very fortunate that I was able to, figure out where we were and that we had to evacuate before, the roads got so overwhelmed, even in the next just 5 hours. And so that map-based information is very critical to evacuations.
That's great. So in terms of following up on the Waze concept, it would identify roads that are now clogged with traffic and provide another route possibly for somebody to use?
So it does that. The platform does that automatically because we're using real-time traffic data. However, I think the areas where when roads are closed, when they're compromised, if there are bottlenecks that are relevant and we need to redirect, what we really want to happen is instead of that happening automatically, we want to give, sheriff and firefighters the opportunity to, recognize what's happening and redirect the road as needed. Sometimes you have to use, for example, during an evacuation, sometimes a road that is not usually a one-way street has to become one in order to get people out. And so by being able to have an interface between public safety and the public, you can make much more informed decisions that way.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Rich?
Yeah, couple quick comments and then a question. The first comment is—
I hope they're not about caramel.
No.
No.
No, Buddy will ask you about that. No, first of all, I sure hope people are going to continue to have the paper map system as a backup, simply because
Yes, that's not going anywhere.
Good, because my fear anything electronic can go down, and that backup may be essential. I'm glad that's recognized. I'm listening to you, and I can't help but think of the Oakland Hills fire. I mean, a lot of us here remember it all too well. One of our former members lost a house in it, and I ride my bike up in that neck of the woods, and I still see, Marlborough Terrace and riding by Charing Cross Way and remembering that people died on those streets, and perhaps this system could have saved some lives then. And the question is how this information sort of gets edited or curated, if you will. I'm wondering if there's, as the system gets up and expands, I could see a potential for sort of information overload, where there's so much information coming in that people can't access the information they individually need. Are you seeing that as an issue, and how are you addressing it?
Yeah, actually, that's an issue that we've noticed with a lot of the systems that have existed in the past. We're not the first people to put points, routes, and polygons on a map, of course. Mm-hmm. And something that we are looking to get away from is the standard approach to, GIS information, which is focusing on granularity over relevancy. And we want to take the opposite approach, where we focus on relevant information over and above all else. And so if you are a citizen and you are logging onto your platform, you get onto the Perimeter platform, whether it's the app or you just go onto the website, and you see, what you'll see are the 3 to 5 data points that are most relevant to you as a citizen: evacuation routes, temporary refuge areas, where the mandatory and advisory evacuation zones are. However, if you were a first responder, you'd be prompted to log in when you got to the website or when you were on the app. And as first responder, when you log in, you have information that is relevant to you and proprietary to maybe your agency. So things like, being able to opt in to share your location with your chief, with your strike team leader, etc. Those are things that will drastically help to allocate resources. That's information that is just some of the most basic, straightforward, and necessary points, routes, and polygons. No superfluous information.
Thanks.
I'm not surprised that someone's thinking of it, but I'm glad to hear that you are.
Fred, stand by. You need to
took me a moment to unmute. So Bailey, like Rich Shearer, I'm thinking of disaster scenarios within the disaster, and clearly this platform depends a lot on communicability, on data cells, signals. Have you given thought to the risks of overload or the availability of bandwidth coming down just when people are depending upon it most?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Actually, connectivity is one of the first issues that we tend to talk about with the different customer development agencies that we've been working with over the past 2 years as we've built our product. And there are a few things that we're doing to mitigate some of the issues that we face there. And, over time I think the decisions that we make, the ability of better technology, right? In the future, we are really, or Elon's Starlink, or peer-to-peer information sharing, Bluetooth, mesh networks. Those are going to be great in the future. But right now, it's the case is just that they're not good enough for the problems that we face in terms of connectivity. And so what we've already built into the platform is we've made sure that it automatically saves all the incident information locally to your device that you had access to at one point, and then it timestamps that information. So even if you lose connectivity for 30 minutes or an hour as a first responder, something that happens on a regular basis, you still have you still have GPS, so you still know where you are in relation to other incident information, and you have at least the most recent hour of information. Now, the Forest Service, when they go off to fight fires, they're they're under a canopy of trees in the middle of nowhere. They oftentimes lose connectivity for a while. But on these wildland urban interface fires, there are typically many pockets of connectivity. You just kind of never know when you're going to hit one. And so with our platform automatically saving or caching that information, once they hit connectivity, it will download it without the first responder or the citizen having to worry about it. And then when they're able to get their phone out again, they'll have that information ready.
Hey, Bailey, just so you know, your audio is a little weak, so you might consider turning your video off so we can hear you. Not that that always works, but
Okay,
sometimes it improves it. So Jamie, you're
okay.
up.
Bailey, it's already been asked, but I just want to go a little further on that. So in the fires that have been existing recently, how often has coverage, Wi-Fi or cell towers been affected by the fire? Has that happened?
Yeah.
And then is the platform active now? I know you said beta testing, but where are you at currently? I'm not clear on what the current status is in terms of operational.
Yeah, so with regards to your first question, connectivity is very often an issue. I don't think I've heard of a wildfire in the past few years where it wasn't an issue. It's not, again, first responders, they actually use their cell phones on a pretty regular basis on these incidents. They're maybe texting each other, or they're on a call, because radios, I don't know how often you talk on radios, but if more than one person is communicating, it's a little bit challenging to hear them. So many first responders actually opt to use their phone as their primary communication device. And so they know that, oftentimes they're going to lose connectivity on an incident, but they also depend on their phones for a lot of the operations that they do. And then, yes, with regards to where we are as a company with our product, this is our second fire season beta testing. We have not released the product, even though we probably could have released the product after the Kincaid fire. For us, the stakes of the data that we're working with and displaying it's incredibly high. And we are working to be, as intentional and and careful in many ways, with the first responders, with the groups that we're working with, and with our platform, because we don't want to build something that we say, okay, it's good enough, and then the first responders learn to depend on something new and it lets them down. We have put in a lot of checks and balances to make sure that when we get this platform into people's hands next year, it's exactly where it needs to be. I know with a lot of companies, that's not, especially with software, right? You can release kind of a minimum viable product that maybe isn't up to snuff, at maybe at worst and embarrassing. But that's not really what you do with public safety tech. And knowing that my dad and my mom and many of my family members and community members are probably going to be using this platform, the barrier to its success is definitely high.
Thank you. Are you guys taking investors? Are you open for investment at the moment?
Yeah, so we finished Alchemist Accelerator this year, and we started raising an angel round. We're almost ready to close that angel round, and then we're going to focus on our first large deployment.
Cool.
Thank you. Thanks, Billy.
Don
Well,
Jenkins?
my question was to sort of piggyback on what Jamie just asked. Is this being provided, or is government support being provided here to help you get funding, or are you all doing this on individual investors?
Yeah, so we are applying for some grants, and we're working with a few departments to acquire some of their project-based budgets. So when we started working with Palo Alto Office of Emergency Services, for example, they became customers of ours to engage in this beta testing R&D process in some ways. And so, yes, we do have some partnerships there. However, those government partnerships tend to take a pretty long time to actually come to fruition, of course. But we knew that when we got into this industry, and so we're waiting patiently. But a lot of the angel round that we've already raised has been from individuals as opposed to governments.